Hi, it's Narelle English from the Assessment Research Centre. I'm going to give you a lecture on taxonomies. So the learning outcomes for this lecture are to understand what taxonomies are and how they can be used, to identify taxonomies for skills, knowledge or attitude, and to differentiate between levels on taxonomies. So what is a taxonomy? Well, in general, a taxonomy is a classification system. A taxonomy in science, for example, is a way to identify and classify things according to their attributes, such as living things or substances. Taxonomies used in education are concerned with classifying learning development. They are general in nature and describe qualitative shifts in cognition, such as Bloom's and Solow, skill development from novice to expert, as in Dreyfus, or attitudes towards learning, such as Krathwohl. In this way, general taxonomies can be used to guide the writing of progressions of learning in specific domains. Bloom described the Bloom's taxonomy as a panorama of the range of educational possibilities against which the limited breadth and depth of any particular educational course or curriculum could be contrasted using a cumulative hierarchy. This vision of Bloom for his taxonomy is core to how taxonomies can be useful when writing constructs and designing learning progressions. Taxonomies can be used to hypothesize how learning within a domain develops and then used as a guide to describe what emerging learners can do through to what highly able learners can do in terms of the qualitative shifts in observable behaviours. In this way, teachers can describe a progression and use the progression to assess, monitor, and track what diverse learners can do. So how can a taxonomy be used? Taxonomies can be used to guide educators to write a progression of learning about how learning develops in a construct, write a common language to communicate across year levels and teachers, and develop a system that guides the development of formative assessment and summative assessments that account for learners with diverse starting points. Taxonomies can be used to guide educators in cognitive development, such as Bloom's and Solow, skill development, such as Dreyfus, and affective development, as in Krathwohl. You might be quite familiar with Bloom's. It's one of the earlier learning taxonomies and goes from students who just remember information to then understanding, being able to apply it, analyse it, evaluate and create. These are not lock steps. Bloom's taxonomy should be used as a guide. Select carefully from Bloom's to avoid being procedural. Apply the levels that match indicative behaviours, that is, the behaviours that students do, say, make and write. Make sure you are describing qualitative shifts in student behaviour such that when they attain a certain level, it is unlikely that they would not demonstrate this competence in a similar assessment. SOLO stands for Structure of Observed Learning Outcomes. This has been developed by Biggs and Collis, and the focus is on the quality of the organisation and complexity of student responses. SOLO was formed by analysing the basis for discriminating between responses of different quality. SOLO analyses student responses to tasks. Many factors, either intrinsic to the learner, such as the student's developmental stage, their attitude or motivation towards the task, and factors outside the learner's control, such as the instruction they were given on a task, might impact their response. However, when using SOLO, the focus is purely on the student response presented at a given time, the actual evidence that you have before you. This is a distinction between the generalised cognitive structure of the individual and the structure of the actual response, which could be impacted by many factors. Pam Hook has some excellent resources on what SOLO looks like in practice. This is one on science in terms of classifying. You can read it in your own time and pause if you like. However, PAM Hook has many samples, and it's good to go and look at some samples if you don't already have some of your own. Dreyfus is looking at skill acquisition from novice to expert. A new skill can be learned by imitation or by being instructed. Most people, when acquiring the new skills, will find someone who can teach them. You can distinguish skills as something which you can read about, but when you come to perform the task, the reading doesn't actually help you carry out the task. You need to practice. Developed by analysing a learner who is acquiring a new language, pilot training, and beginner and experienced chess players. As the learner becomes more skilled, they depend less on abstract principles and more on concrete experience. We need to address at each stage of the training what are the appropriate issues involved in facilitating advancement. Think about riding a bike. Well, let's have a look at this example. Imagine if you were to try and learn how to bounce an Australian rules football. Now remember, the shape of an Australian rules football is not uniform. It's not round. Imagine if you were told, step 1, step forward with your non-preferred foot and push the ball down. Step 2, focus on the bottom north part of the ball hitting the ground first. Step 3, make an arc from your hand to the ground. Do you think you'd be able to bounce the ball and have it come back to you the first time? You probably need to practice before you can actually get the ball bouncing, coming back to you, ready to kick. Krathwohl has a taxonomy of attitudinal shifts from receiving through to characterising. Patrick Griffin would say that there's even a level before this of rejecting. You might see this in schools. So if you look at the levels between this, receiving, responding, valuing, organising and characterising, think about an example where you've had to have a shift in your attitude. I'm going to use the example of joining the gym. If you're rejecting, you might have no interest in paying attention to your fitness. But let's just say that you have made this shift and you're receiving. Let's just say you perhaps made a New Year's resolution. You're going to actually change your fitness behaviour. Someone who's responding might actually go and join the gym, spend the money and get themselves a gym membership. Valuing, how can you adapt that level for someone who's joining the gym? What might someone at valuing do? They might buy a new outfit for the gym or make plans for a time they can go to the gym, like early in the morning or late in the afternoon, after dinner, whatever suits. They're actually making plans. They're starting to value this idea of getting fit. But there's a big shift between valuing and organising. What does it look like to actually organise yourself to get there? You can talk all you like about going to the gym, but doing that big step of organising yourself to get there, look at the different levels and what the shifts are between levels. Then there's another big shift between characterising. Suddenly you've decided that the gym's great, it really worked for you, you start trying to convince all your friends that they need to go to the gym. So what we're looking at in terms of adapting taxonomies is these shifts between the levels, the thresholds. The taxonomy listed here can give you some general ideas, but you're going to have to adapt it for your own situation. Let's have a look at some levels. Let's just say we're at a school where a student has to wear their uniform, school uniform. Where do you think tucks the school shirt in when they see the teacher and pulls it out when the teacher goes? Do you think they're at valuing? They're probably a little bit beyond rejecting or responding. They're receiving the information. They know that it's a school rule. We might put them at responding there. What about the next one? You can see them wearing the school uniform correctly on public transport, even though they're not anywhere near the school and it's after school hours. What level would you put this student at? I'd say they're beyond organising. They're probably right up there at characterising. Okay, your turn. Pause the video for a minute now and think about whether it's a knowledge, skill, or attitude. Take a minute to assign whether you think the following statements align more closely to knowledge, skills, or attitude. Okay, back again. Here's where we assign them. How did you go? Have a look at the last one. Sometimes they're a combination of all the three. Managing a student who's distressed in the schoolyard, well, first of all, you have to have attitudinal shift towards wanting to, rather than walking away. You need to have some knowledge into what the school processes are or how to manage a student who's distressed. And sometimes it just takes years of practice or good observation of students to actually recognise that they're distressed and go and do something about it. So we know that in learning, often we're impacted by knowledge, skills and attitudes all at once. This is a typical progression of development for babies from birth to being able to walk. The stages are observable and most babies will go through most of the stages on their path from not moving to walking. The different stages are quite obvious and can be seen by just observing. Often stages in learning are not quite as obvious as this, and that's where taxonomies are very useful. The taxonomies listed here, which we think can help educators describe stages of learning, can be used to help you think about the recognisable shifts in learner progression as they develop in sophistication from emerging learner to highly able learner.